Hi everyone, it's Rebecca here on Mindstone. I know it's a little later than my usual live videos, but I'm feeling particularly inspired tonight. And it's because I just finished watching a really powerful skit, actually, by a lesbian comedian. Her name is Hannah Gadsby. She has a skit called Nanette, which I will give you a link to. Basically, it's about how she is trading in her career as a comedian. She's been a comedian for over 10 years. And she talks about how she's trading in her self deprecating humor surrounding her life as a fat lesbian, and how she wants to stop giving in to the conventions of comedy. So she talks about how comedy is really just about rising tension and punchlines, and how it's usually very self-deprecating. So this comedy skit, she talks about how instead of going into comedy and speaking of her experiences in a very comedic fashion, she actually turns towards a much more raw depiction of what her life was really like as a fat lesbian, physically androgynous woman, where she lived, which is a very small town in Australia, just outside of mainland. And one of the things that I found was super inspiring was, of course, her telling her story about being an extremely marginalized human being in this world. I have to say that I was extremely inspired because, um, first of all, I feel very blessed to be a Jewish, bipolar, bisexual woman in our day and age. Luckily, coming from where I come from, I never had to deal with too much discrimination for my marginalization, even though I can be very marginalized in different parts of the world. And I wanted to speak a little bit about marginalization and how our societal conventions really kind of limit the kind of people that we should aspire to be. There are a number of different ways of being marginalized in our society, everything from socioeconomic conditions like being poor, or being of a low background. There's also, of course, being physically marginalized. So if you're fat, if you're ugly, if you're disabled, there's racial marginalization, whether you're black, whether you're brown, or whether you're white, or all these different ways that we can feel very marginalized. And one of the biggest problems about marginalization is it makes us believe that we don't belong here. And over the years, I've come across so many different types of people from so many different walks of life. And despite where they come from or who they are, or what they're like on the surface, the fact of the matter is everybody here belongs to be here on this earth. And it's so important for us to recognize that. It's also made me really reevaluate what my goal is here on Mindstone. Originally, I wanted it to be a source for me to basically bestow my knowledge and resources surrounding mental illness to anyone who will listen. And now I've decided that it's really should just be about telling my story. Because our story is really the source of our humanity. And it's really the humanity that connects us all. So that's what I was learning tonight when I was watching this comedy skit, which actually wasn't really a comedy skit at all. So I wanted to basically discuss how, all of these different conventions, all of these different ways in which we believe, attribute to our self-worth. So whether that means our physical appearance, the size of our wallet, the number of times we can vacation during the year, our living situation, all of those things really doesn't matter and doesn't equate to our happiness. There's a lot of different things that we have misconceptions about in terms of our happiness. And one of the biggest things that I've been thinking about tonight is really just being someone who has free thought and can make their own decisions about what being a worthy individual in society is all about. So it's really about creating your own margins. For example, for me, I was discussing with a friend of mine today that, my requirements for a partner has changed dramatically as I got older. I no longer care too much about physical appearance. I no longer care too much about status. I no longer care too much about even political stance. I'm much more concerned about the size of someone's heart versus the size of their wallet or their size of their manhood or anything superficial like that. And so I think that it's important for us to create our own margins. Another thing that I wanted to mention as well is that in the spirit of believing that, we all exist here, whether, you're, black, white, lesbian, gay, poor, rich, all of those things are just superficial slices of our identity. And there's so many things that we really don't know and understand about the people that we surround ourselves with. And it's important to really be cognizant of all the pieces of a story that we don't see. So one of the biggest contributors to my depression was what I like to call compare-itis, also known as the grass is always greener. And one of the things that I really found out in my recovery and all the experiences that I've had and all the wisdom that I've gained over the years is that, when you look at other people and you see everything that they have that you don't, what you don't see is all the work and all the sacrifice that was made to get them to that point. So if you think that other people are prettier than you or fitter than you or richer than you, just be very mindful of the fact that you have no idea what they've had to go through to be where they are today. And that's something that we need to be very, very mindful of, because if we don't, anybody on this earth can seem better than us, especially when we're at a low point in our lives. Everybody seems like they're having a much better life than we are. Everybody seems like they're much more worthy of love than we are. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that, when I was sick, I lost all my lovable qualities, all the conventional lovable qualities that we know of, like being pretty or smart or capable or witty or funny. I lost all of those things. I no longer had my stylish clothes. I was walking around in a hospital gown. I was far too anxious to have anything interesting to say. My medication was making me have acne. I still do, if you can see them right here. I started to grow facial hair. I gained, 15 pounds. So I no longer had my body. I no longer had my looks. I no longer had my intelligence. I no longer had my confidence. And what I didn't lose was my fight to survive and my belief that, despite it all, I still have a story to tell. And I think that it's very important that we recognize our stories. And so that's what I learned with this skit and how she was telling us her story of what living life in her skin really feels like. And that's one thing that I think is one of the most powerful tools that we can have. Diversity is a strength. I think that it's the cure of discrimination, much like I think that multiplicity is the cure for conformity and marginalization. We always want to have multiple stories. I started this channel. I didn't want to be the representative of mental illness. I'm not the representative of everyone that's mentally ill. We all go through it in very different ways, but we all have our humanity. And I think that the world would be a much better place if we focused on what we have in common versus what we have in difference. And so I wanted to make that very clear. Another thing that I noticed as well going through my illness was that, like I said, I had what I call compare-itis. I was seeing slices of everyone's life. So be very, very mindful and careful about that, because this Facebook tool is really just a book of faces. Faces. They're not lives. They're not stories. They're not even close to a portion of the whole truth of people's lives. We really don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And a lot of the things that we aspire towards, like success or fame or fortune, don't really equal happiness. I can tell you firsthand that even in the hospital, I met a lot of people that were very, very, very successful by conventional standards, and they were still extremely unhappy and not in a position where they felt worthy of love or life or health or care. So I want to do my part in kind of bulldozing those misconceptions that we carry that really take a toll on our happiness. One of the biggest ones that I just mentioned is success does not equal happiness. A lot of people are very, very successful, and what we don't see behind their success is all those hours of work, all the cost that's been put into that, all the time that they spent in attributing that success. We also don't see all the unfair advantages that they may have had that we don't, all the privileges that they have that we may not. So be very careful about who you think is successful, and ask yourself, do you really believe that, the cost of that success is something that you're willing to pay for or compensate for? And you'll start to have a lot more of a realistic perspective on what happiness really means, and whether or not it's something that is the best thing for you. We all have different forms of happiness, and we all have different pathways to get there. So just remember yours and be grateful for yours. Another thing that I have to bulldoze in terms of misconceptions is money does not equal wealth. Like I said, I've met people in the hospital who were very, very wealthy. I met a middle-aged man who was, earning a six-figure salary, had shares in a very profitable company, had a beautiful wife, a very beautiful child, and he was miserable. He never had a chance to see his family on a regular basis. He never had time to have any fun or get any enjoyment out of his life. He had a lot of money, but not a lot of wealth. So be mindful of that too. Just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean that you're wealthy in life. So that's another misconception that I'm going to bulldoze right for you now. Another one that I'd like to bring about is the fact that beauty does not equal inner beauty. So, as I stand before you, I've got a face full of acne. I'm 20 pounds heavier. I have lots of flaws, and guess what? I'm not afraid to show them. And I know a lot of really unconventional, beautiful people who inspire me on a daily basis, and I find them beautiful. So beauty does not equal inner beauty. That's one other misconception. Status does not equal class. I've also had the life experience where I've met people that were in a great socioeconomic position and had absolutely no class and treated other people really poorly. So be mindful of that as well. Just because they're of high status does not mean that they have class. Conversely, I've also seen other people who were actually quite poor, but carry themselves with a lot of class and a lot of dignity. So I think that we should start to reevaluate what we consider status. So that's another one. Another one is, of course, possessions don't equal fulfillment. I can tell you firsthand that in the hospital, I had virtually no possessions. And it didn't actually affect me as I thought it would be. So just be mindful of the fact that, what you own shouldn't own you. Another thing is wealth doesn't equal abundance. You can have a lot of wealth and feel quite empty. And finally, fitness does not equal health. I know that, for example, myself, I gained a lot of weight, and I saw a lot of girls who were very fit, had really great bodies, and they were very unhealthy. There's also a lot of men that you see that are very lean, very muscular, and they actually have a slew of medical conditions because their diet may not be very good. So what I'm trying to say here is that appearance does not equal reality, and it's time that we start to reevaluate the margins of what we consider worth, in terms of our social and self-worth. And and what we consider to be our happiness, um, and really start to own our story, which is my final point. So from now on, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life. I'm not going to give you the tried and true methods of mental illness, even though I will share them if you do want me to. But I'm just going to tell you my story, and I hope that it inspires you to tell yours. Because, like I said, we have our own stories, and it's time that we start telling our own instead of recycling the old ones that we've always had. And that will always be around. So let's combine more and more stories so that we can get closer and closer to the truth. So I'll leave that with you there. Have an excellent night and an excellent weekend. And yeah, check out this skit. She's fantastic. Again, her name is Hannah Gadsby. And the skit is called Nanette, Nannette. That's all for now. And thanks again for tuning into Mindstone. All the best.